All right, let's talk about an absolute legend, a machine that pretty much defined an entire generation of gaming, took over living rooms all over the world, and still holds a record that no one has been able to touch. We're talking, of course, about the Sony PlayStation 2, and we're going to dig into the secrets of how it became such an icon.
160 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's not some wild guess. That is the real, confirmed number of PlayStation 2s sold around the world. It is, to this day, the undisputed best-selling console of all time.
So you have to ask, how? How did one single piece of hardware pull that off? Well, it wasn't luck, and it wasn't just one thing. It was this perfect mix of brilliant strategy, really bold marketing, and just a ridiculous amount of content. Let's get into it. Okay, so here's the first big secret to the PS2's success. Sony wasn't just selling you a game console. Nope. They were basically smuggling a futuristic entertainment hub into your house, and the game console was its disguise. To really get how genius this was, you got to transport yourself back to the year 2000. DVDs were the hot new format, but a player for them, that could cost you $1,000. Easy. Then Sony walks in and drops the PS2 for just $299. All of a sudden, for way less than half the price of a DVD player, you got a machine that could also play these incredible new games. For a family, it was a total no-brainer.
And this, right here, was the killer move. It wasn't just a cheap DVD player. It was the whole package. It played your music CDs. And, crucially, it was fully backwards compatible. That meant your entire library of original PlayStation games, your controllers, they all still worked. In one fell swoop, the PS2 became the new center of the living room.
But, having a great product is one thing. You've got to sell the vibe. And Sony's marketing for the PS2, it was like nothing the gaming world had ever seen. The whole message was, this is a different place. The old rules don't apply here.
Yeah, instead of commercials with happy kids, Sony's ads were, well, they were dark, they were artsy, and they were super weird. They really plugged into that early 2000s counterculture vibe. This wasn't about selling a toy. It was about selling an experience to young adults who are ready to take gaming seriously.
And to really drive that surreal, artistic point home, who did they hire? Only the master of the bizarre himself, David Lynch. Yeah, the commercials he made were unsettling, you could not forget them, and they were absolutely nothing like what Nintendo or Sega would ever do. It made the PS2 feel less like a product and more like a statement. Of course, a cool box and edgy ads don't mean much without games. And this brings us to the third and maybe most important pillar of the PS2's success, its game library. And honestly, library feels like too small a word. It was more like a sprawling, chaotic, bottomless universe of stuff to play. Worldwide, over 10,000 games were released for the PlayStation 2. Just think about that number. 10,000. That sheer volume meant there was an absolutely insane variety of choice. I don't care what you were into, the PS2 had a game for you. And yeah, of course, it had the absolute titans, the system sellers. Games like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas or Metal Gear Solid 2 that sold millions and millions of copies and showed you what that emotion engine chip could really do. These were the certified masterpieces. But here's the funny thing. The strength of the PS2 wasn't just in those huge, polished hits. A massive part of its legend comes from the sheer flood of everything else. The budget games, the licensed tie-ins, and the weird experiments, some of which were just unforgettably, hilariously awful. I mean, just listen to this take on Simpsons skateboarding. The game was so fundamentally broken it became famous for it. It was trying to be Tony Hawk, but it just failed so hard that it became a legend in its own right. Is the kind of fascinating train wreck you could only find on the PS2. And who can forget Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, a game that was so glitchy and slow it was like watching a PowerPoint presentation. The frame rate would just die. But you know what? These infamous duds are just as much a part of the PS2's story as the masterpieces are. So at the end of the day, that incredible range, from the absolute best to the absolute worst, was the secret weapon. You had your huge franchises, you had your quiet, artsy cult classics, you had games that caused a stir, you had super weird stuff like a game where you play as a mosquito, and you had mountains of cheap licensed junk. That whole spectrum meant there was truly something for everyone. Beyond the big picture stuff, the PS2's legend is also built on something a little harder to define. It just had character. The console itself was full of these small, clever touches that gave it a real personality. One of the absolute coolest examples was the startup screen. You'd boot it up and see these weird white towers. Well, those weren't just random graphics. Each one of those towers was a game save on your memory card. And the taller the tower, the more time you had sunken into that game. It was literally a visual diary of your gaming life. So cool. And there were so many other little things. That satisfying click when you rotated the PlayStation logo so you could stand the console up vertically. The simple fact that games on CD had blue bottoms and games on DVD had silver bottoms. You had wild accessories like the iToy camera that let you control games with your hands. It all added up to a machine that just felt special. So you take the great value, the edgy marketing, that endless library, and all of that personality, and you put it all together. The result? Total, complete, and utter domination that went on for a very, very long time. The PS2 was officially in production for 13 years. Just wrap your head around that. Sony didn't stop making the PS2 until January of 2013. That is the same year that its successor's successor, the PlayStation 4, was launched. That kind of lifespan is just unheard of. And here's the kicker. New games were still coming out for it. The last officially licensed PS2 game was released in late 2013, almost 14 years after the console first hit shelves. That level of support from developers and from players is just staggering. And the result of that long, long reign was this. Look at those numbers. The PlayStation 2 didn't just beat its competition, the original Xbox and the GameCube, it crushed them. It outsold them combined by more than 3-1. It wasn't even a race. So when you boil it all down, the secret to the PS2's success wasn't one single thing. It was this perfect storm. It was the right machine at the right price, with the right attitude, at exactly the right time. And that leaves us with one last big question. The PS2 was a product of a very specific moment in time, a time of physical media and a very different gaming world. In today's era of digital downloads and games in the cloud, could one single box ever capture the world's imagination so completely ever again? It's definitely something to think about.